The new Fragment Fusion event has launched, and this is our Octoberfest Fusion champion, Brewguard Jeroboam. Now, for those of you who have yet to decide if he could add some value to your roster, I'm going to give you my champion review of Jeroboam in this video, and then we're going to follow that up with our no-fail fusion plan so that those of you who do decide to pursue this fusion have the best chance of success. I am Colred. This is Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. Let's get started. So this is the last official video of the month of September here at Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I'd like to give a last thank you shout out to my buddy Dreamer for creating this excellent September banner. And also thank you to all of you who have helped us reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers by the end of this month. And since this is the last day, we'd like to end September on a high note. So if you have not yet already, please subscribe to the channel. And as always, smash that like button and consider joining our Discord community. Thanks so much for all the support. Now let's get back to your video. As we always do in these champion reviews, we are going to start by taking a look at the stats first, and then we will move on to the skills next. A quick note about that defense label up there. You should really think of Jeroboam as a support champion, kind of like Syl of the Drakes, right? She's also labeled defense, but as a healer and reviver, she really fulfills a support role in our rosters. Well, Jeroboam is a cleanser and turn meter filler, so really he's a support champion. He's not a tank. He's not a defensive-based damage dealer. So keep that in mind as we review the rest of his kit. Now, when we look at his HP pool at 18.1k here, this feels a little bit low for a champion of this type. His defense number, on the other hand, at basically 1.5k, feels pretty high. 1500 defense is a lot of defense. So I do think this is going to impact the way we build him. And you might want to keep this in mind when there's like a ignore defense mechanic in play or something like that, because he's not going to have a massive HP pool to lean on in terms of survivability. Just be aware of that. Now, his base speed is 108. I know the game has gotten faster in the last year, but I still think a speed of 108 is a great platform from which to build a fast champion, so he should have no problem in that regard. His resistance of 30 is good. We want resistance on our cleansers, so that's a good place to start from. Whereas his accuracy of 20, I don't even know that we need this. He only has one skill that requires accuracy, and I think a lot of people are going to opt to not include accuracy in his build and just get him more speed and more survivability. And you'll see what I mean when we take a look at that skill. So speaking of skills, let's start with his A1. This is called Stout Smash. Remember, he is the October champion, so we're going to see a lot of drinking related names here for the skills. This is a double hitter that has a 50% chance when booked of decreasing the cooldown of a random ally skill by 1 turn. We've seen this A1 pop up a lot recently. I know that White Queen Ancora has a similar one. I think Grand Oak Paudraig has one. There's some other champions who have this A1. In this particular case, we have this secondary effect. If an ally had their cooldown decreased, also fills that ally's turn meter by 10%. The combo of these two skills really makes him difficult to speed tune in like a clan boss speed tune. I don't think that's going to be a problem. I don't think you're going to want to use him in clan boss. You're going to kind of focus him probably in like arena and hydra and maybe some wave content. So I do think this is a nice A1. I wish it weren't as RNG based as it is, but that's just the reality of raid. There's always RNG. Taking a look at the A2, this rounds on me. This is an AoE cleanse. I think an AoE cleanse is a must-have ability for every roster. Usually you want it multiple times. So if you are a mid-game player and you either lack this skill somewhere on your roster or you don't have that many of them, you may want to consider fusing this champion just for this one skill in addition to all the other things he does. So I do think this is an excellent skill. It's also a pretty solid heal. 15% of this champion's max HP. That's why I think he doesn't have a huge max HP pool. Also heals each ally by an extra 2% for each debuff removed. And then finally places a shield buff on all allies equal to 15% of his max HP for 2 turns. So it's a cleanse, a heal, and a shield. That's pretty solid on a 3-turn cooldown. Now the A3 is Last Orders. This has a 100% chance of increasing the duration of all enemy debuffs by 1 turn, and then increasing the duration of all ally buffs by 1 turn. And in addition, it fills the turn meter of all allies by 20%. Now, you might be thinking that you could pair him with Wixwell in like a clan boss comp, but remember, typically in order to do an infinity comp like clan boss team, you want this to be on a 3-turn cooldown, and this is only on a 4-turn cooldown. So I think that in addition to the A1 being problematic for clan boss, this is not as advantageous for clan boss as it might otherwise appear. However, it's a bit of turn meter fill. 20% is pretty solid. I do think this is a useful skill. This is where you would need the accuracy, by the way. That first half of increasing the duration of enemy debuffs by 1 turn, that requires accuracy. That's the only thing in his kit that requires accuracy as far as I can tell. Let me know if I'm missing something in the comments below. Now, if we look at his passive, this is the first time we have a skill that is kind of, I don't know if it's unique, but it's highly unusual in Raid. All of the other skills we've seen before, but this is a passive that has a passive effect and an active effect. Remember that the cooldowns on these affect the active effect. The passive effect will happen all the time. So the turn meter reduction effects used by this champion are decreased, against this champion are decreased by 50%. So he doesn't take as much turn meter reduction as somebody else would. Also fills this champion's turn meter by 20% whenever a CC of any type, including petrification and sheep, are placed on an ally. If there are multiple champions, we don't care about that part. So basically you can't use like 2 Jeroboams. So this is great. This basically gives him turn meter fill in arena or in some other places, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But when a CC is used or turn meter reduction effects are used, like he gets a benefit. And that ultimately should get you thinking about arena. And I do think this passive will be useful in arena. Now, there's also an active effect that whenever a CC is removed or expires on an ally, it fills their turn meter by 20%. So if you think about, like, you know, when you get stunned, like, or you get your turn meter reduced in arena, a lot of times it's hard to get your team back up to speed. Basically, Jeroboam is helping you by giving you a scenario where, you know, when that stun comes off, you get an additional 20% turn meter right away on that champion. Now, again, this is on a 2-turn cooldown, so it's not going to happen to every single champion because this is 2 of Jeroboam's turns. But remember, he's getting a lot of turn meter fill as well, so he should get more turns than almost any other champion on your team. And that potentially opens up either very, very fast builds or even like relentless builds could be cool on Jeroboam because he's going to be getting a lot of turns. Again, something that you wouldn't use in a clan boss team. Finally, he has an aura of all battles accuracy of 60%. Not 60%, sorry, just flat 60. Increases ally accuracy in all battles by 60%. You can read. So I think there are going to be 2 really good uses for Jeroboam. I think he's going to be useful in arena, especially in like 3v3 arena where you can't just build 3 go first teams. You're going to need to go into some go first teams with some go second teams. He's going to be great for go second teams to be disruptive, potentially help you recover when you get behind that fast team and then take them out. The second use, which I think is going to be more exciting for most players, is Hydra, because this passive is going to be crazy strong in Hydra. Fills this champion's turn meter by 20% whenever a fear or true fear is placed on an ally. So when the Head of Torment is out, the Head of Torment puts fears on any of the champions that hit the Head of Torment. Now, Inquisitor Shamil has a passive like this where he removes fears and true fears when they get placed, and he actually increases turn meter as well, not for himself, but for an ally. And that gets utilized in Hydra quite a bit. I actually think Jeroboam and Shamil could be a crazy duo where you could make Jeroboam maybe the leader of your team. Maybe not. He could be not the leader of your team. You could have a different leader. But you could give him the lead spot because he has a nice all-battle aura of accuracy. And then Shamil would remove the fears and increase Jeroboam's turn meter. And then Jeroboam would increase his own turn meter. And he would increase everybody else's turn meter because of this active effect. Not as much, right? Or potentially you don't make him the lead and you have like someone like an Astrid or a Nekmothar as a lead. And then both Shamil and Jeroboam are increasing that leader's turn meter. It has potential to be kind of crazy. I think in certain scenarios, people are going to abuse this passive to create the fastest teams we've ever seen in Raid. I do think that that's possible. And I think that's what people are going to get excited about. And that's, I think, ultimately the real reason to fuse this champion. So if you don't care that much about Hydra, or you don't really care about this aspect of like theory crafting a Hydra team, then maybe this is a pass. I don't know that outside of these areas he's going to be extremely good. I do think he's solid in waves. I think anytime you have an AoE cleanse with a heal, like this is a survivable champion that adds survivability to your team. That's a useful skill to have. That's a useful role to play. So I do think for mid-game players, you should certainly consider him. I would probably think of him as like an A+ champion for that kind of scenario, right? He's definitely going to be a decent support carry for any mid-game players that don't have these roles filled already. As for endgame players, I think the endgame scenario is probably like maybe a little bit of live arena, some 3v3 arena, and then potentially some of the fastest Hydra teams we've ever seen. So now that we've done the review, let's go ahead and look at the calendar of events and figure out our fusion plan. Here is our fragment event calendar. It's a little bit unusual. In fact, I don't think there's ever been a calendar exactly like this before. First of all, there are only 15 events, which is unusual in itself. Typically, there are 16 or 17, but we have seen 15 event calendars before. The biggest difference is when you notice what's missing. So you'll see there are 2 Dungeon Divers events here. There are typically 3, so we're missing a Dungeon Divers event. And then we have a Champion Chase tournament in the first weekend, but we don't have a Summon Rush. And then finally at the end, we have this Hero's Path. I think that's clearly indicating that this Hero's Path will be a combination of a Summon Rush, so you can pull shards, and a Dungeon Divers, so you can get drops from dungeon. Now, there are 110 fragments in the calendar. There are an additional 20 here for tournament winners, but we never ever plan on those. So if you're lucky enough to win a tournament and get those extra 10 fragments, that'll change your approach. But for everybody else, especially all you free-to-play players like me, you never ever consider that you're going to win those 10 fragments. So this means that we can only miss 10 fragments somewhere in this calendar. And because the Hero's Path is 20 fragments, that means we can't skip the entire Hero's Path. We're going to need to get at least half of the fragments from the Hero's Path event. And I expect this to be a pretty tough event. So that's likely where I'm going to go for only 10 fragments. So I'm going to go for 1/2 of these fragments. And that means I need to complete every single other event on this entire calendar in order to get my fusion done. Now, if you are a spender and you don't mind spending, just be aware that this particular weekend is not a 2x event, right? This is not the 2x event. The 2x event is here. This is the 2x, and it should be a 2x sacred event if they go according to the calendar. So that means for the Champion Chase, you're getting the 2x sacred. We prefer to generally have the 2x during the Summon Rush that is usually, happening there. But again, in this case, we don't. So even if you're a spender, you might not want to spend a ton of shards there on that Hero's Path. But again, who knows what they're going to throw into this weekend? It could be another progressive for Odin or something else that goes on there. So there might be an additional incentive to pull shards. We can no longer really predict what Plarium does with these things. They keep messing with the formula that they establish. So this being said, I think the safest route is, again, to plan on just 10 fragments out of the 20 here. And that means we have to complete everything else. Now, the rest of the events and tournaments actually feel okay, right? We have a Dragon tournament, a Fire Knight tournament, Spider tournament, and an Ice Golem tournament, all in normal positions. And because there are only 2 Dungeon Divers event, this actually makes it a little bit easier for us if we're only going for half of the Hero's Path and we expect to use shards to do it. What I would say is hopefully you haven't started the Dragon tournament yet, because the Dungeon Divers tournament, event starts tomorrow. So the best thing that you could probably do here would be to do the Dragon tournament inside the Dungeon Divers event with food so that you get champion training points as well. That's literally that triple dip that we always are trying to get. It's even more than that because you're getting silver, you're getting drops. It's like a quintuple dip. It's crazy. But so if you can do a Dragon tournament with food, wait until tomorrow when the Dungeon Divers event starts, and then drop your full 2K energy in there, and that'll all go into the Dungeon Divers event. And then you want to drop all of your Fire Knight energy in there as well. And that'll get you 2K. And then you can decide where you want to do your additional 1K energy. Because remember, Dungeon Divers events typically take 5,000 energy, whereas the dungeon tournaments take around 2,000 to 2,100 energy, roughly. Now, for the second Dungeon Divers event, We don't have really, I wouldn't expect any overlap with the Fire Night tournament. So even though it looks like it overlaps on the calendar here, I wouldn't expect that. So basically you've got the 2K that you're going to put into the Spider tournament, the 2000 energy there is going to go in, and then you're going to need a lot of other energy to go into this Dungeon Divers event. So I think what you should do is in this first window, and after you've done this 2K, whatever you want to do, this is where you do the Odin dungeon. And in fact, if I had to say, I would actually say over here too, you want to do the Odin dungeon, right? So for the extra 1000 energy, anytime you don't have to be in a regular dungeon, you should be doing the Odin dungeon to complete your Dungeon Divers event. Odin dungeon is so much ridiculously better than the classic dungeons. If I could put 100% of my energy into the Odin dungeon, I would, because pinpoint accessories are just crazy OP. I'm going to make a video on that in the coming week. It's just where you want to spend that extra energy. So get out of Spider, get out of Fire Night, get out of wherever you are. And once you've completed those tournaments, get into the Odin dungeon for the rest of the Dungeon Divers events. Now, this last Ice Golem tournament, you definitely want to save it until the Hero's Path starts, and then put your 2K energy in there. And that will at least give you a start on that Hero's Path towards those 10 frags. And then hopefully with whatever shard pulls you do and whatever other energy that you spend, you can complete those 10 fragments in the Hero's Path. Again, if you want to put more energy in, I would put Odin dungeon energy in to get into that Hero's Path. Now, the champion training events are typical. You know, if you're a more advanced player, you're going to be doing those in the tavern like I typically do. And again, you know, we have the same numbers we normally do. We have a tournament early on and a training event later on. But just be aware that you want to make sure that you have enough to complete this champion training event, because this is going to go all the way to the last day of the fusion event calendar. And if you miss out on these 10 fragments, you are totally hosed, right? So you have to get those 10 fragments, unless you're going to skip those 10 and do all 20 in the Hero's Path. 3 artifact enhancements are typical. They each take roughly 20 million silver. So we're looking at 60 million silver. And just a reminder to you newer players, if you haven't done too many fusions, you don't need 60 million in your bank today. I usually think anywhere from like 10 to 25 million is a good starting place, depending on like how many other sources of silver you have. So if you have a ton of forge materials and you can get a lot of silver from the forge, or if you have a lot of extra energy and you can get more silver through energy by doing Dungeon Divers or whatever, then you're going to be able to build this 60 million during the course of the calendar. Remember, this is a 2-week calendar, so you have a lot of time to get silver together. Again, also, if you haven't done a gear cleanse, but it does take about 60 million silver in total. So again, a good starting point. I'd say if you have less than 10 million silver today, this is going to be tough. It's going to be tricky. Classic arena takedowns are generally okay as long as you are in gold. Like if you're in low silver, you're going to have to probably buy some additional arena tokens if you want to get this done. But if you are in gold, even like the bottom of gold, you're probably going to be okay completing these classic arena takedowns simply by being active. Make sure that you're using all of your free tokens every day, and you should be fine. I don't see any other curveballs here. Just make sure that you have each of these events like timers locked into your brain so you don't accidentally miss a timer. Because I think that's the most common failure point. It's not that we don't have the resources. Sometimes people do these without the resources and they fail. But I think other times people have the resources and just miss timers. I know that's where I typically fail. So like I'll be kind of casually working on this Fire Night tournament and then just not finish like the last 500 energy because it ends at 4 a.m. and I forget about it. That's the thing that you want to be sure that you don't do for a fragment event like this, where there really aren't bonus fragments out there. Because I think when the bonus fragments are all in the Hero's Path, it's safe to basically consider that as no bonus fragment. Okay, so there it is, our no-fail fusion plan. I have decided I will be going for Jeroboam because I think he's going to be fun in Hydra. And right now I've got a little bit of a Hydra focus going on. I don't think he's a must get for everybody, but certainly if you don't have that cleanser and healer role filled out for your mid-game roster, you should certainly consider it. And also, if you're at endgame and you like Hydra, he could potentially be really interesting to play around with. Otherwise, I think you have to have a PvP focus to have much value in this champion. Let me know in the comments below, have you decided to go for Jeroboam? Or are you going to take a pass on this because you're exhausted? Because, oh my God, they've been hitting us so hard with events. I wouldn't blame you if that's why you passed. And certainly, I think if that's why you're going to pass, you shouldn't feel bad about it with Jeroboam here, because I don't think he's a must get. It's going to be fun, but you can pass. All right, that is it for me today. I have been Colred. Thanks for hanging out. I will see you in another video soon.